Good morning. So, as presented before, I'm Yoann and Kanaka, my colleague, will be presenting together. So the objective of today's session is to talk a little bit about what's going on at Asia-Pacific level, from my side, and then we'll go a bit more in depth of what's happening in the India market. So let's get started. Good news is that inflation is slowing down globally and across markets, but obviously we are seeing different patterns across, the Asia-Pac region. We're actually seeing some markets, like Hong Kong, Korea, where, inflation, market value growth, is deflating. But you also see on the opposite side, a lot of markets where we still see market value growth growing, but still slowing down, right? If you take the example of India or Pacific, Australia, and New Zealand, we still see, some growth in terms of value across FMCG categories. So obviously, if you look on the left, that's putting a lot of pressures, on our APAC consumers, right? I don't think it's new news to you, but if you look at the concerns that our consumers are having, number one, you will see increasing food price, increasing, utility bills, and then the economical downturn, right? But then we do see a different patterns on the right? You see like across markets is very different, right? Number one will still remain, the food price as a main concern, except for China, we have different concern. You see China is actually, having more concern about global warming and environment. And for example, you see also in China, the COVID worries, of coming back. When you look across markets like India, you're actually seeing that job security is coming in the top. If you look at Australia, the housing crisis is also at the corner and worrying, consumers. So obviously, this is, if you go to the next level, we do see that different pattern when it comes to FMCG categories, right? And there are different winners. If you look at the graph on the left, so this is basically showing the FMCG contribution for multinational brands, regional brands, and local brands. And what you see over the last couple of years and even beyond, we see local brands, gaining share out, of multinational and also regional brands. And if you look on the right, we also see a different patterns across different type of categories. You see, for example, in dairy, in OTC health supplements, and also in pet care, where those local brands are really leading. But we still see a stronghold, from MNC players, in beverage, for example, and also in some of the categories like, packaged food. So when consumers are looking at new products, right, they are looking at different attributes, different benefits, right? And what you see across the region, across 4 key categories, so packaged food, snacking, confectionery, beverage, and also alcohol, we see convenience being very critical. We do see, the health attributes, low sugar, low calories. And obviously we see, another one which is, about the affordability, right? Obviously talking about inflation, people are very price conscious and very careful about what they buy and the benefit it provides, to them. Channels, right? So here you're looking at the importance across channels in the APAC region. So over the last few years, actually, we have seen, channels, smaller store formats like, CVS and mini markets growing and continue to gain share, especially in Southeast Asia. You're seeing e-commerce in China and in Korea that is driving the growth, of e-commerce. And we see actually a recovery on traditional trade across certain markets, including, China, India, and the Philippines. So in a nutshell, consumers are very price conscious, looking for convenience and affordability, right? We do see channels who are benefiting more than others, especially e-commerce, which has been growing a lot, especially since COVID, where we see consumers has been adapting on the way they are paying, the way they are buying products, and leveraging innovation. And we see also those channels, still growing, smaller store formats, getting proximity as a strong advantage. And obviously, this inflation, which is going to bring, a lot of opportunities and driving volume, was the second half of next year. So now I'm going to pass to Kanaka, who's going to deep dive into India to show you the difference between what we see in APAC and the India market. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Yoann, for walking us through the APAC trends. And we will now move a little closer home over to the Indian consumer sentiments. So if we actually look at India in the past few years, while we see that there has been a deceleration, a slowdown in growth, and then a slow pickup in the global economy, I think India remains more optimistic from that sense. It's important for us to understand what are the factors that are actually driving this growth or this sustained growth and revival in India. The first one is the size of the economy itself. We are at $3.4 trillion as of now, poised to grow up to $5 trillion by the end of this decade. Driven mostly by the tier 2 towns where we see the growth coming now, and also by the large number of MSMEs that continue contributing more and more to the GDP as we pass every year. The second one is a fundamental shift in the income as well as the consumption structure of the Indian consumer. This is driven mostly by the demographic dividend that we have compared to the rest of the APAC markets. And finally, the rapid digitalization in every aspect of life that we are seeing over the last couple of years. While these factors actually contribute to the growth of the Indian FMCG sector, it does not mean that the sector is immune to the other headwinds that we are facing. So what we have seen in this year is below average rainfall. It's been lower than average by about 6% this year. The second one is a lag in the sowing of oil seeds and pulses, which is expected to have an impact on the prices of food going forward in the consequent quarters. Exports have dipped in the recent quarter. And finally, the surging crude prices, they continue to bother the FMCG sector still, right? So we constantly see a fluctuation in the prices also still happening. And then it's only natural that the consumer is actually going to exercise caution when they actually spend on FMCG or other categories for that matter. Having said that, the good news is that the Indian consumer still seems resilient. So a recent study that we conducted, we went to the consumers and actually asked them, how do they plan to open their wallets for the next 12 months? The interesting thing is that, more than 50% of the consumers are actually, not just committing to spend equal amount of money, but actually more in the next 12 months on specific categories pertaining to the essentials segment as such. The second segment, which is interesting to note, is consumers are willing to spend more on categories which will make their future better. So savings, investments, education are the ones in line. Having said that, even if they are willing to spend more, it doesn't mean that they are not counting their pennies, right? So there is an era of calculated spending that we actually see amongst the Indian consumers. What we clearly see in the food and beverage categories is that almost 75% in general trade is the number of categories, number of all F&B categories that actually see a high salience of more than 80% of affordable brands. That's a huge chunk, right? Modern trade is expected to have a slightly premium construct, but even within modern trade, this proportion remains to be 63% of all F&B categories, which is huge. So consumers are clearly focusing on affordable brands still. That's one key insight. But that's not the only strategy that they are actually using to save on FMCG. So there are multiple strategies that they actually use or leverage to adapt to the inflationary pressure. The first and foremost is looking at or shopping online to get better deals, to minimize their shopping trips or to save on fuel as well. The second, which is slightly in line there, is also about using digital technologies or apps which give them discounts or better deals when they buy on digital technology. The third one is to monitor the cost of the entire basket rather than looking at savings on every product that they buy in the basket. And finally, buying in bulk or focusing on economy packs or larger value for money packs is a strategy that consumers have adopted. If you actually scroll through the entire list of strategies that they are actually using to save on FMCG, you will realize that these are the strategies that are actually shaping the retail trends that you see in India. So interesting to note all of these strategies. Moving on to the second theme, we clearly see that private labels are here to stay. Now, as value has become very important for the consumer, or the top key priority for them, we see a sweet confluence of the retailer's push strategy as far as private labels are concerned, and the consumers' demand for the private labels as well, which is leading to us, that as an increasingly viable option for consumers. Interestingly, more than a third of the consumers not only think that private labels are good value for money, but increasingly we see a shift in consumers thinking that they are good alternative to store brands as well. More importantly, 31% of the consumers actually think they are of equal quality, if not better, than the named brands. So private labels clearly seem to be here to stay. Quickly moving on to some numbers that NielsenIQ is famous for. We actually see that the segment is growing at 1.6 times the size of the entire category. The growth is mostly driven by staples. It's seen an increase of 2.5 percentage points overall, driven largely by the packaged rice category, and processed foods, where we see a 1.4% percentage point increase, driven by breakfast cereals. On to the next theme, which is health needs. Now, similar to what Yoann presented for APAC, we see the same focus on health needs closer home as well. But in the minds of the Indian consumer, the first and the foremost important concern that they have is around the environmental factors. We blame the pollution first and then move on to our own health, which is physical health, sleep, emotional health, and diet as such. You see this in the choices that consumers are making when they go and buy their brands as well. So to give you a sense of how health-focused brands are growing, if we actually look at all the brands which have some sort of a health proposition in the food and beverage category, within GT, they hold a share of about 10%, and within modern trade, they hold a share of 20%, growing rapidly across both the channels, right? Interestingly, the growth in volume is also driven by double-digit numbers. And that kind of explains that it's not only because the healthy products are more expensive that they are selling well in value, there's also a clear consumption increase that we see for healthy products. And then finally, coming on to the talk of the town, which is the online channel, right? India is at the forefront of technology adoption, at the forefront of digitization. We have 850 million internet users, and we still keep counting. So that's definitely forming the crux of how brands are interacting with consumers, how consumers are adopting new brands, and the whole FMCG distribution landscape itself. So if we just have a look at how the Ecom share of trade has evolved over the last year, we clearly see that in the metros markets, right, we see a clear 1.5% increase that they have seen over the last 1 year, vis-a-vis modern trade, which has also registered a share of gain of about 0.5%. Within the online channels, we continue to see a huge proliferation of platforms of different types. So it's not only pure play Ecom that's driving the growth. We see the likes of Zepto doing quick commerce. We have the hyper-local model. There's micro-delivery that's going on, and basically everything that makes sure that the consumer gets the convenience that they are seeking from the online channel. So that's here to stay. So I spoke about 4 trends, but what does this really mean for all of us? The first and the foremost is that effective price management strategies, they are of utmost importance in prolonged periods of inflation. So it's not just about reducing your price and discounting, it's about offering the value to the consumer. That's number 1. If you align your strategies, which are in line with the consumer's judicious spending strategies or their spending or their saving strategies, then you will be in a much better place. The second one is to invest in private labels. Given the confluence of consumer pull and the retailer push that I spoke about, they are here to stay. But ensure that you don't rely solely on the price proposition itself. It's important that we move away from that and learn to coexist with the named brands as well. The strategies that we could look at are around differentiation of products and innovation as well. The third one is to focus on the healthy proposition. Now, when it comes to the healthy proposition, it's no more about only addressing the health concerns that consumers face. It's actually also about ensuring that we reduce or minimize the negative attributes of the product. Talking about the environmental factors also and linking it to that. And finally, build a robust online strategy. By robust, I don't mean something that works now, but something that's future-proof, right? We have to adapt to the constantly evolving digital landscape, and if we keep pace with that, with the speed of growth there, that is only when we will succeed. So I think that's just a glimpse of what we do at NielsenIQ to provide you with the full view. There's plenty that we do around retail trends, there's consumer trends, and around brands as well. Yoann, me, my team are going to be here through the day, and we will be happy to interact with you with your ideas, suggestions, and any questions that you have. Thank you. Over to you.